The envelope shook between my fingers as I sat in the courtroom, my dark brown hands speckled with age spots standing out against the dull manila. Across the aisle, my daughter Marquita smoothed the lapel of her tailored blazer with the same meticulous care she'd used to walk away from her boys 15 years ago. At 62, with silver coils framing my face and a body carved by years of hard work, I'd learned to recognize the moments that split a life clean in two, and this envelope, softened at the edges from countless nights of me tracing it in the dark, held the power to crack open the polished lie she'd been living. "Your Honor," Marquita's lawyer began, his voice smooth like velvet wrapped around a knife. "My client has been denied access to her own children for 15 years. She is requesting immediate custody and pursuing kidnapping charges against the defendant, her mother, Ms. Chantel Rowe." Kidnapping. The word tasted like pennies and blood in my mouth. I pressed my lips together and felt that familiar throb in my lower back, a souvenir from nights spent folded into hospital chairs, keeping watch over 3 feverish little boys who cried for the woman who birthed them, only to hear me whisper, "Grandma's here, baby. Grandma's right here." Judge Ellison, a man whose brown skin was creased with time and whose silver hair told me he'd seen every brand of human selfishness, leaned forward. "Ms. Rowe, you've been caring for these minors since they were 3 years old?" "Yes, Your Honor." My voice sounded calmer than my pounding heart. Behind Marquita, I caught sight of my boys, my grandsons, now 17, tall enough to look most grown folks in the eye. Leonard sat in the middle, his jaw tight in a way that tugged memories of his father up from my bones. On his right, Kendall had his hands laced together so tightly his knuckles glowed pale, while Rico stared down at the worn carpet as if he could slip into it and vanish. They didn't know about the envelope yet. They didn't know the whole truth of what their mother had done. "And during this time," the judge continued, "the mother had no contact?" "She came twice," I answered carefully. "Once when they were 8, asking me for money. Once when they were 12, staying 3 days before disappearing again." Marquita shifted and I saw something flash across her face. Guilt, fear, before that practiced mask slid back into place. She had always been striking, my child. Even now at 38, with her caramel skin flawless and her hair laid just right, she had that soft, helpless glow that made people want to rescue her, to buy whatever story she was selling. It had taken me years to see past that shine to the sharp, cold calculation beneath. Her attorney cleared his throat. "Your Honor, my client was suffering from postpartum depression and battling substance abuse at the time. She needed space to recover. That does not cancel her parental rights." Postpartum depression, as if those 2 words could explain leaving 3 toddlers to cry themselves hoarse night after night. As if they could excuse boys who hid crackers under their pillows because they weren't sure there'd be dinner tomorrow, or who jolted at every sound in the hallway, never knowing if the footsteps meant their mama was finally coming home, or if someone was coming to take them away. "Ms. Rowe," Judge Ellison's voice pulled me back from the memories. "Do you have documentation of your guardianship?" This was the moment I'd rehearsed in my mind 1,000 times. I rose slowly, my knees complaining after hours on the hard bench. "I do, Your Honor," I said, "but I'd like to present something else first." Every eye followed me as I walked toward the bench, feeling Marquita's gaze burn between my shoulder blades. The envelope felt almost weightless now, which was funny considering how heavy its contents had sat on my soul. "What is this?" the judge asked as I handed it to the bailiff. "Proof," I replied quietly. "Proof of what a mother truly is." Judge Ellison's brows lifted as he opened the flap and reached inside. I watched his expression shift when he pulled out the first photograph. Leonard on his first day of kindergarten, front teeth missing, grinning so wide it looked like his face might split as he held up a brand new lunchbox. Kendall clutching a blue ribbon at the elementary school science fair, tears of joy tracking down his 6-year-old cheeks. Rico at 7, skinny arms wrapped around my neck after wobbling down the sidewalk on a bike without training wheels for the first time. But it wasn't just pictures. There were report cards tucked into clear sleeves, every teacher note I'd filed away, permission slips for field trips signed in my careful looping handwriting, clinic records showing my name as the emergency contact. The person authorized to hold their hands when bones were cracked or fever spiked. The one who answered the phone at 2 a.m. when the school nurse called. "Your Honor," Marquita's lawyer protested, "childhood mementos don't—" "Sit down," Judge Ellison cut in, his voice still soft but edged with steel. The attorney sank back into his seat while the judge kept turning pages, his face growing heavier with each item. "Ms. Rowe, how long did it take you to compile all of this?" he asked. 15 years, I said. Every school program where their names were called and she wasn't there to hear it. Every birthday party where we had to explain again why their mama didn't come. Every Christmas morning when they stared at the phone hoping it might ring. Every Father's Day when they made cards for my husband, their granddaddy Earl, because they needed a dad and he was all they had until cancer took him 5 years ago. Behind me, one of my grandsons made a small, strangled sound, hurt or recognition, I couldn't tell. I didn't turn around. If I saw their faces, I might lose the strength I'd spent years building. The judge lifted one particular photograph, and even from a few feet away, I knew which one it was. The 3 boys at 10 lined up in front of our little fake Christmas tree in my cramped apartment. They were wearing matching pajamas I'd sewn from discount fabric, arms slung around each other, faces lit with a joy so pure it almost hurt to look at. "Where were you when this was taken?" the judge asked Marquita directly. She straightened, but for the first time her composure slipped. I was working on myself," she stammered. "Trying to get my life together. I couldn't—" "You couldn't what?" His tone stayed even, but the danger underneath it was clear. "You couldn't send a Christmas card? You couldn't make a phone call?" He looked back at me. "Ms. Rowe, is there anything else in this envelope?" I nodded. "The school records, Your Honor. Every form that needed a parent's signature, every emergency contact sheet, every permission slip, every medical release for 15 years. He pulled out a thick stack of documents and leafed through them. I knew what he was seeing, my name filling the line marked Mother Guardian, my number listed first when it came to emergencies, my signature granting permission for shots, x-rays, field trips, counseling, whatever they needed. "And how often does your daughter's name appear on these forms?" he asked. He asked. "Never, Your Honor," I answered. "Not once." The room went so silent I could hear the old radiator clanking in the corner. Marquita's lawyer leaned toward her, whispering urgently, but she just shook her head, her face drained of color. The judge laid the envelope on his desk with careful hands. "Ms. Rowe," he said, "I have one more question. Do your grandsons know what's in this envelope?" I met his gaze without flinching. "Not yet." "And why is that?" Because truth can crush a child even when that child is almost grown. Because I'd spent 15 years shielding them from the fact that their mother hadn't just walked away. She'd disappeared so completely that there wasn't a single scrap of paper in any school office with her name on it. Because I wanted them to have the chance, Vioan, I said slowly, to get to know their mother one day without carrying my anger on their backs. But they're old enough now to hear the whole story. The judge leaned back, and something in his face told me he already knew what he was going to rule. Before he could speak, Marquita shot to her feet. "I made mistakes," she burst out, tears spilling over. "But they're still my sons. I brought them into this world. I love them." I turned to really look at her then. The tears were real, not the stage-managed ones she'd use so often to get what she wanted. For a brief second, I saw the teenager who had called me at 3 in the morning when she first realized she was pregnant and terrified. The young woman who'd promised me she would be the kind of mother she never had. But that flicker of memory couldn't hold against the years of reality. I remembered 3 small bodies pressed against me during thunderstorms, trembling as thunder rattled the windows. I remembered shouting myself hoarse at baseball games, their eyes shining with pride because they'd heard me cheering. I remembered the day they were 5 and started calling me Mama Gran because I was the only mama who stayed. "Love gefeg," I said quietly, "isn't just a feeling. It's the choice you make every single day." Judge Ellison nodded slowly. "Ms. Rowe, please step back. I need to speak with the boys." My heart hammered against my ribs as I watched my grandsons rise together. 3 similar faces, their late father Wendell's dark eyes and stubborn jaw, but something of me in the squared shoulders and the way they instinctively closed ranks, shoulder to shoulder. "Leonard, Kendall, Rico, the judge said gently. "I know this is hard, but I must ask you directly. Do you want to live with your mother?" The silence stretched tight as piano wire. Finally, Leonard, who had always been the one to speak for his brothers, cleared his throat. "Your Honor," he said, his voice deeper than I was prepared for, "we don't really know her." Those 6 words hit the room like a thunderclap. I saw Marquita flinch as if someone had slapped her. Her lawyer closed his eyes, defeat written plain on his face. But it was what Leonard said next that would echo in my mind long after that day. "But we'd like the chance to try." His words were still ringing in my ears hours later as I set 3 mugs of hot chocolate on the chipped coffee table in my tiny living room, a ritual I'd kept up almost every night for 15 years. Leonard's declaration had earned them a 2-week trial period with Marquita, 14 days to decide whether they wanted a relationship with the woman who had vanished when they still wore pull-ups. "Gran, you're shaking," Kendall observed, his soft voice threaded with concern. At 17, he'd inherited Wendell's sharp mind, but with a tenderness that scared me sometimes. The world could be cruel to a black boy who felt everything so deeply. I glanced down and realized the ceramic mug trembled in my hand, clinking against the saucer as I tried to set it down. "I'm fine, baby," I lied. "No, you're not," Rico said quietly. He pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose, a nervous habit he'd picked up in 3rd grade. "You haven't been okay since court." They were stretched out on my old secondhand couch, the one they'd turned into a fortress 100 times, draping it with sheets and stacking cushions into castles. The fabric was worn thin in the places their knees had dug in during movie marathons, and a faint grape juice stain still marked the cushion from the night Kendall got too excited during a heated Monopoly game. "Boys," I began, easing into my favorite armchair, the one angled just right so I could see all 3 of them at once, just like when they were small. "I want you to know that whatever you decide, I support you." The lie scraped my throat raw on the way out, but some lies are just armor. How could I tell them that the thought of Marquita taking them away felt like my lungs being ripped from my chest? That I'd already walked through each silent corner of this apartment in my mind, imagining what it would feel like without their laughter echoing off the walls. "She wants us to move to Lakeport," Leonard said after a moment, staring into his cup. "With her and her boyfriend." Boyfriend. Marquita had mentioned him in court like it was a footnote, a high-flying investment banker she'd been with for 8 months. 8 months, and she thought that counted as stability for 3 boys she'd left for 15 years. "She showed us pictures of the house," Kendall added. "It's big. There's a pool." A pool. As if chlorinated water could rinse away years of abandonment. As if square footage could stand in for bedtime stories and doctor visits. "And we'd have our own rooms," Rico said, though his voice held no excitement. "She said we could decorate however we want." I nodded, keeping my face neutral while my heart folded in on itself like old paper. "That sounds nice," I managed. Leonard leaned forward, eyes so much like Wendell's, serious, steady, older than his years. "Gran," he said, glancing toward the kitchen table where the envelope sat like a verdict, "why didn't you ever tell us about all that?" Judge Ellison had let me bring the envelope home along with his ruling. The boys would have the choice, but first, they needed the unvarnished truth. I'd been bracing myself for this moment since yesterday. "Because, I said slowly, children shouldn't have to carry the weight of their parents' mistakes." "We're not children anymore," Kendall murmured. He was right, of course. Somewhere between me helping them sound out spelling words and teaching them to parallel park my ancient Honda, my boys had turned into young men. They towered over me now, voices deep, faces sharpened into the angles of impending adulthood. But in my heart, they were still 3 little boys with tear-streaked cheeks asking, "When's Mama coming back?" "No," I agreed softly. "You're not." I rose and picked up the envelope, my fingers tracing the edges like they always did. Inside wasn't just paper. It was every sacrifice, every choice. Every night I'd watch their chests rise and fall, praying I'd live long enough to see them grown. "Your mother was 23 when you were born," I began as I sat back down. "Younger than you'll be in a few years." I swallowed. "Your daddy, Wendell, God rest his soul, was deployed overseas. She was alone with 3 babies, and I—" The words came out jagged. "I failed her." Rico blinked. "What do you mean, Gran?" "I was working 2 jobs, you say," I said, staring at the envelope instead of their faces. "Your granddaddy Earl had just gotten his first cancer diagnosis. The bills were drowning us. When Marquita called crying, saying she couldn't handle it anymore, I told her she had to be stronger. That motherhood meant sacrifice." I pulled out a photo I'd never let them see. Marquita at 24, eyes hollow, holding all 3 of them while they screamed. She looked like someone who'd vanished from her own life. "I should have seen she was sinking," I said. "Should have moved in with her or made her move in with me. Something." Instead, I stood in my kitchen giving advice while she was falling apart in hers. "That still doesn't excuse what she did," Leonard said, steel sliding into his tone in a way that hurt and comforted me all at once. "No," I agreed. "It doesn't. But it explains how she got there. Your mama didn't just leave you. She ran from the part of herself that couldn't stand to watch herself fail you." I sighed. "Some people run toward their problems. Others run as far and as fast as they can. Marquita ran." Tears slipped silently down Kendall's cheeks. Rico had gone very still, the way he always did whenever he was trying to process something too big for words. Leonard's hands were clenched into fists on his knees. So why come back now? Leonard asked. Why drag you into court and call it kidnapping? This was the piece I'd hoped to shield them from, but truth doesn't stay buried forever. I reached into the envelope and pulled out a separate folder, the papers that had arrived only weeks ago. Your father had a life insurance policy, I said quietly. A big one. It was set up to pay out once you turn 18. Your mother is named as beneficiary because on paper she's still your guardian. Silence crashed over the room. She's only here for the money, Rico whispered. We don't know that for sure, Hafiodeos. I tried, even as the lie sagged between us. Yes, we do, Leonard snapped, rising so fast his mug rattled. He paced to the window overlooking the small courtyard where I'd run alongside them, one hand on the back of each bike as they learned to ride. The timing isn't random, Gran, he said without turning. We turn 18 in 3 months. 3 months, I repeated, feeling the weight of it in my bones. There's more, I admitted, hating myself for the words that followed. She filed paperwork 6 months ago to have me declared an unfit guardian. She just waited until now to serve it. Why? Kendall asked, though I could see in his eyes he already had the answer. Because if the court decided I was unfit, I said, she'd automatically get you back on paper. And as your legal guardian, she could access the insurance money right away instead of waiting for your birthdays. The betrayal hit them like a physical blow. I watched as something shifted in their faces, the last threads of childhood hope snapping, replaced by something harder and more brittle. She never wanted us, Rico said flatly. She wanted the check. We can't say for sure what's in her heart, I murmured, though I barely believed myself. Stop protecting her, Leonard burst out, spinning to face me. And stop protecting us. We're not little kids anymore. We can deal with the truth. He was right, and I knew it. But my instincts had been forged in years of damage control, always stepping between them and pain. I'd spent so long cushioning every blow Marquita delivered that I'd forgotten they'd grown strong enough to stand on their own feet. You're right, I whispered. I'm sorry. Leonard's anger deflated as quickly as it had flared. He crossed the room and sank to one knee beside my chair, taking my small, work-roughened hands in his big ones. Don't apologize for loving us, he said simply. Something broke loose inside me, and the tears I'd been swallowing since court finally spilled over. These boys, these almost men, were my whole world. I had poured my savings, my time, my health, my own dreams into them so they'd have a chance at something better than what life had handed their mother. What happens now? Kendall asked softly. I wiped my cheeks and forced my shoulders straight. Now, I said, you choose. You've been given a choice, and I will honor it. Even if we choose her? Rico's voice was barely above a whisper. The question cut right through me, but I held his gaze. Even then, I said, because real love isn't about owning people. It's about wanting what's best for them, even if it rips you apart. We need some time, Leonard said, to talk, to think. I nodded. Take all the time you need. They filed into their shared bedroom, the narrow space where I'd somehow squeezed 3 twin beds, 3 dressers, and 17 years of boyhood memories. Through the thin wall I could hear their low voices, serious in a way that made my chest ache. It sounded like boys crossing the bridge into manhood in a single night. I sat alone in the living room, surrounded by the artifacts of the life we'd built together, honor certificates taped crookedly to the walls, photos crammed into mismatched frames, piles of textbooks and gym bags cluttering every corner. My phone buzzed on the table. A text. Marquita. The boys seemed tense when I dropped them off. I hope you're not turning them against me. We need to talk before they decide. Can you meet tomorrow? I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. After 15 years of silence, after dragging me to court and accusing me of kidnapping the children I'd raised, after trying to snatch them back for a payout, she wanted to talk. I typed back, Maple and Main Cafe. 2 p.m. Then I set the phone down and began to plan what would be my daughter's final lesson in consequences. The Maple and Main Cafe had been Marquita's favorite spot when she was 16, back when she still called me Mama instead of Chantel, like I was another stranger on the street. I chose it on purpose, wanting the smell of cinnamon coffee and old memories to remind her of the girl she'd been before greed hardened her heart. I arrived early and claimed the corner booth where she used to spread out her homework while I hustled across the street working the late shift at the diner. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had worked doubles for most of her childhood so she could have more than I did, only to watch her walk away from everything I'd fought to give her the moment motherhood became more than she could handle. At exactly 2 p.m., Marquita swept in wearing a cream wool coat that probably cost more than my rent. She'd always been beautiful, but there was something plastic about it now, like a photo that had been filtered one too many times. Success clung to her like expensive perfume, even if it had been bought with the coin of abandonment. "Mama," she said as she slid into the seat across from me. The word sounded stiff, like she'd practiced it on the ride over. "Marquita," I replied, keeping my tone neutral, studying the face I'd known since it first scrunched up and wailed in my arms. At 38, she still glowed youthful, but faint lines had settled around her eyes, whether from guilt or time I couldn't say. She ordered a skinny oat milk latte without even glancing at the menu. Of course she did. I asked for plain black coffee. Some things don't change. "The boys are confused," she started as soon as the waitress left. "I can tell you've been filling their heads with your side of the story." My side. It's as if there were multiple versions of being left behind. "I told them the truth," I said quietly. "Just the facts." "Facts can be twisted," she countered, leaning forward, that old wheedling note creeping into her voice, the same one she'd used at 16 when she wanted to stay out past curfew. "You have to understand I was sick after they were born. Postpartum depression is real. I couldn't—" "You couldn't call?" I cut in softly. "Not once in 15 years?" The question hovered between us like smoke. I watched her carefully rehearsed defense falter. For a heartbeat, something raw flashed in her eyes. Fear, shame, maybe both. "I wanted to," she murmured, "but the longer I stayed away, the harder it got. How do you explain to 3 little boys that their mama just left?" "You don't explain," I said. "You apologize. You come home. You go to therapy. You do the work. You show up." "I was building a life," she insisted. "No," I said, my voice calm but cold. "You were running. There's a difference." I leaned back, letting the words settle. "And now you've come back because that life you built is crumbling and you need funding to keep it standing." Color rushed to her cheeks. "That's not true. This isn't about money." I reached into my purse and pulled out another folder, the one I'd assembled that morning. Screenshots, printouts, records. I spread them on the table between us like cards in a game she'd already lost. "Your boyfriend's investment firm is under federal investigation," I said, almost casually. "His accounts are frozen. You've been living in a house you can't afford on credit cards that are all but maxed out. Your car note is 3 months behind." Marquita stared at the papers, the cafe noise dulling to a low hum around us. "How did you even get this?" she whispered. "I may have gray hair, but I'm not stupid," I said. "I hired a private investigator with the last $1,000 I had in savings." I tapped one of the documents. "You filed for bankruptcy protection 2 months ago, the same week you had me served with those custody papers." Customers laughed and spoons clinked around us, the normal life of the cafe continuing while my daughter's pretty little story came apart at the seams. Her latte sat untouched, the foam collapsing into lukewarm beige. "Even if some of that is true," she said finally, grasping for ground, "it doesn't change the fact that they're my sons. I have rights." "Rights," I repeated, tasting the word like something rotten. "Tell me, what rights did they have, Marquita? The right to a mother who showed up? The right to birthday calls? The right to know they weren't something you regretted?" "I made mistakes," she said again, softer now. "You made choices," I corrected. I gently gathered the papers and slid them back into the folder. "Every day for 15 years, you chose not to dial their number. Not to send a letter, not to ask how their day went. Don't you dare pretend that was anything but a choice." "I thought they were better off without me," she whispered. "No," I said, meeting her eyes. "You thought you were better off without them." The words hit her like a slap. I saw her flinch, saw the mask crack just enough to reveal the scared, selfish girl underneath. "What do you want from me?" she asked, voice trembling. "I want you to walk away," I answered. "I can't," she snapped, panic bleeding through. "I need that insurance money." "I know," I said. "That's the problem." I folded my hands on the table. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to withdraw your custody petition. You're going to go back to Lakeport and tell that man of yours that the payout he's waiting on isn't coming. And you're going to leave my grandsons in peace." "And if I don't?" she challenged. This was the moment I'd been cutting my sleep in half to prepare for. I reached back into my purse and pulled out a second folder, this one thicker and heavier than the first. "Then," I said, sliding it toward her, "I will dismantle what's left of your pretty little life." Marquita let out a brittle laugh. With what? You're a 62-year-old woman in a studio apartment. What could you possibly have? Slowly, I opened the folder and began laying out photographs and documents, not the family memories I'd shown the judge, but a different collection altogether. Screenshots of her own social media posts, credit card records, hotel receipts, email printouts, all of it gathered by the investigator I'd hired with my last $1,000. All of it legal, all of it damning. This was you in Bahia last spring, I said almost casually, tapping a glossy photo of Marquita sprawled across the deck of a yacht, one leg kicked out, champagne flute raised toward a cloudless sky. Same week Kendall was in the hospital with pneumonia. I called every number I had for you. You didn't answer once. The color drained from her face. I slid the next paper across the table. This is your credit card statement from that trip. $15,000 on spas, designer sandals, and waterfront dinners while I was working back-to-back shifts to keep your son breathing. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. Her fingers twitched against the edge of the table. And this, I continued, unfolding another document, is especially interesting. I laid it flat between us. Your marriage certificate, to one Mr. Darrell Patterson, dated 3 years ago. So you've been somebody's wife this whole time, not just dating that banker like you told the court. Marquita's eyes widened. How did you, public records? You'd be amazed what you can find when you bother to look, I said. One by one, I spread more pages across the tiny cafe table. Your husband is the one under federal investigation, by the way. Wire fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, the kind of charges that come with orange jumpsuits and no ocean views. She was shaking now, both hands pressed flat against the table as though it were the only thing anchoring her to the floor. What do you want? She whispered. I want you to hear me clearly, I replied, lowering my voice until it was barely above a whisper. Those boys have been my entire world for 15 years. I sacrificed everything, my savings, my retirement, my health, my friends, to give them the stability you refuse to provide. I will not stand by and watch you stroll back into their lives just to wreck them for cash. They said they wanted to try, she shot back, a desperate edge in her voice. They told the judge they wanted a chance to get to know me. They said that, I answered, gathering the scattered pages into a neat pile, because they're good boys with soft hearts who still hope their mother might be more than a ghost. But you and I both know that's not why you're here. You can't prove. I can prove all of it, I cut in. I snapped the folder shut. Your financial collapse, your secret marriage, your sudden interest in them right before their birthday triggers a 7-figure payout. Every lie you told under oath. I've got the paperwork to match it. She stared at me as if she'd never really seen me before. You're not the same woman who raised me. No, I agreed. That woman believed that if she just loved her child enough, her child would grow up and do right. She forgave too quickly, trusted too easily. I rose, slipping the folder into my purse. The woman sitting in front of you now was forged in 15 years of tucking 3 crying boys into bed while they asked why their mama didn't love them enough to stay. I do love them, she said, tears gathering. Love, I said quietly, looking down at her, isn't a guilty feeling that shows up when your life falls apart. Love is showing up when it's inconvenient. Love is sacrifice. Love is choosing someone else's needs above your own, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. I shook my head. You don't know what love is, Marquita. I turned to leave. What if I fight you? She blurted. What if I drag this through trial? I turned back. Something in my face must have shifted because she instinctively leaned away, shoulders pressing into the back of her chair. Then I take everything to the media, I said evenly. The abandoned children, the mother who reappeared when money hit the table, the criminal husband, the bankruptcy, all of it. And when your name is mud, when your husband is in prison, when you don't have even a rented couch to your name, I'll make sure the boys know exactly who you are. You wouldn't do that to them, she whispered. Try me. I walked out of Maple and Main and into the crisp afternoon air, leaving Marquita alone with the ruins of her carefully built lies. My hands were steady, my path was clear. She'd had 15 years to prove she could be a mother. Now she had 15 hours to prove she could be smart. But as I drove back to my little place in Portland, I knew in my bones she wouldn't walk away quietly. People like Marquita never did. They pushed until the world finally shoved back. Fortunately for her, I'd stopped being soft a long time ago. The call came at 6:47 a.m., ripping me out of the first real sleep I'd had in weeks. After nearly 2 decades as the person every school, hospital, and coach called in an emergency, my heart jumped before my brain even caught up. "Ms. Rowe?" a brisk female voice asked. "This is Detective Tanisha Cole with Seattle PD. I'm calling about your daughter, Marquita Patterson." The formal tone told me what I needed to know before she said another word. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, the hardwood floor cool beneath my feet. "What happened?" I asked. "She was arrested last night in connection with her husband's federal case," Detective Cole said. "Wire fraud, conspiracy, money laundering. She requested that you contact her attorney." I closed my eyes. It wasn't satisfaction that washed through me, more like the heavy certainty of a house finally collapsing after years of leaning crooked. "Detective," I said, walking to the window overlooking the courtyard, where I'd watched 3 little boys become young men. "My daughter and I are estranged. I have no intention of contacting her attorney or helping her in any way." There was a pause. "She said you might answer like that," the detective replied. "She asked me to tell you she's willing to sign custody papers in exchange for legal representation. Even from a jail cell, Marquita was bartering with the only currency she had left, my grandson's. "Tell my daughter," I said, choosing each word carefully, "that I'll be in touch." I hung up and sat in the quiet of my small apartment, watching dust float in the early light. Through the thin walls, I heard my boys stirring, Leonard's low humming in the shower, Kendall's soft complaints about his math homework, Rico's shuffle as he hunted for his missing sneaker. They had no idea yet. But in a few hours, their phones would light up with news alerts and group chats, bringing their mother's mugshot to every screen in school. I refused to let them hear it there first. "Boys, hey," I called, knocking gently on their bedroom door. "Come out here a minute, we need to talk." They filed into the living room, each at a different stage of readiness. Leonard already dressed, backpack slung over one shoulder, Kendall in plaid pajama pants and a hoodie, Rico with his curls sticking up in defiance of gravity. One look at my face and they knew this wasn't about chores. "Sit," I said softly. They dropped onto the couch, shoulders just barely touching, 3 matching expressions of wary concern. "Your mother was arrested last night," I said. No preamble, no softening. Sometimes the cleanest cut is the kindest. The silence that followed was heavy. I watched the news land on each of them, saw surprise, confusion, then something almost like relief flicker through their eyes. "For what?" Leonard asked finally. "Financial crimes tied to her husband's company," I said. "Wire fraud, money laundering. It'll be in the news. Your classmates may see it before first period if we don't tell them otherwise." "Is she going to prison?" Kendall asked quietly. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Probably." Rico adjusted his glasses, his go-to move when he needed a second to think. "What happens to us? Yeah? "Nothing changes," I said firmly. "You're 17, almost grown. You still have a home here for as long as you want it. You still have those college acceptance letters. You still have futures that don't depend on your mother's mistakes." "She wanted us to move to Lakeport," Kendall murmured. "With her." "She wanted that insurance money," Leonard said flatly. "We were just the doorway to it." The blunt truth of it burned, but he wasn't wrong. "Grandy said," Rico said slowly. "What did you do?" "What do you mean?" I asked, though I already knew. "Yesterday, before you went to meet her, you looked different," Kendall said. "Focused. Like you'd already decided something." They knew me too well. "I gave her a choice," I admitted. "Leave you alone or face the consequences she's been dodging for 15 years. She chose the latter." Leonard studied me for a long beat. "So you pushed," he said. "I told her the truth," I replied. "Truth has a way of pushing on its own." He held my gaze, then nodded once. "Good," he said quietly. I blinked. "Good?" "She had 15 years to show up," Rico said, his voice gaining strength. 15 years to make a phone call, send a card, anything. She only came back when there was a check attached. You protected us. Again." Kendall nodded. "How'd you find out about her husband?" "I hired a private investigator after the hearing," I said. "Cost me the last $1,000 I had. Worth every penny." They exchanged one of those silent looks that always made me feel like I was intruding on a conversation that didn't need words. "We're not going to school today," Leonard said suddenly. "You can't miss him," I began. "We're staying home with you," he said, unyielding. "Teachers and classmates can wait." Rico was already tapping out a message. "I'll email attendance. We're all sick today. And for once, it won't be a lie." I should have insisted they keep their schedules, pretend things were normal. But the truth was, I needed them too. All right, I said. But if we're staying home, we're not spending the day staring at walls. We're working on scholarship essays and planning for your futures. Leonard settled back against the cushions. Speaking of futures, he said, what happens to the insurance money when we turn 18? I'd known this question was coming. It's yours, I said. All of it. Your daddy wanted you to have a head start, college, first apartments, whatever you need. I hesitated, then added, it's $1.2 million, split 3 ways. They stared at me as if I'd just said the sky had changed color. Enough for college anywhere, I continued. Enough to start your adult lives without a dollar of debt. Enough that your mother thought it was worth tearing this family apart to try and claim it. She can't touch it now, though, right? Rico asked. With the arrest and everything? No, I said, and this time my smile was genuine. Her legal mess makes it nearly impossible for any court to hand her guardianship. You'll be grown before her case finishes. Your father's money will go exactly where he intended, to his sons. My phone rang again, cutting through the moment. The screen showed a Seattle number. Ms. Rowe, a smooth male voice said when I answered. This is James Porter, attorney for Mrs. Patterson. My client would like to discuss terms for signing over custody in exchange for... I hung up. Her lawyer? Leonard asked. Yes. What's she offering now, Rico said. To trade you, I replied bluntly, for legal representation. She'll sign away her parental rights if I fund her defense. The silence that followed wasn't stunned, it was cold. What are you going to tell him? Kendall asked. I walked to my desk and pulled out a document I'd had drawn up weeks ago, a formal statement declining any financial responsibility for Marquita's legal bills, along with a ledger of what I'd spent raising her children. I'm going to tell him, I said, picking up my pen, that as far as I'm concerned, his client is worth exactly $0. 6 months later, I stood in a sterile corridor of the federal courthouse in Seattle, watching through reinforced glass as my daughter was led away in handcuffs. The orange jumpsuit dulled her beauty, shrinking her somehow. The jury hadn't needed long, under 4 hours, to find her guilty on every count. 18 months to 3 years, the judge had said. With good behavior, she could be eligible for release in 15 months. By then, my boys would be college sophomores, busy building lives that had nothing to do with the woman who birthed them, and everything to do with the choices they made for themselves. Ms. Rowe, a reporter stepped in front of me, shoving a microphone into my path. How do you feel about your daughter's conviction? I looked straight into the camera, thinking of Leonard in Chicago, Kendall in California, Rico in Massachusetts, 3 dorm rooms, 3 different campuses, 3 versions of my boys watching this moment. Justice, I said, isn't always satisfying, but it is necessary. I walked past the reporter and out of the courthouse into the slate-gray Seattle afternoon. In the parking lot, I slid behind the wheel of my car, not the wheezing old Honda that had limped past 200,000 miles, but a used Subaru the boys had insisted I buy. Gran, Leonard had said when he handed me the keys, you spent our whole lives driving us safely. Let us make sure you're safe now. They'd used a sliver of their insurance money to pay for it outright. The 4-hour drive back to Portland gave me time to think about everything that had shifted since that first day in court when I opened the envelope in front of Judge Ellison. The apartment felt different now, quieter without the constant noise of 3 teenage boys, but never truly empty. Their presence lingered in every photo, every dented baseboard, every scribbled note still magneted to the fridge. They called every Sunday without fail, sometimes all 3 together on video, sometimes one at a time, just to talk about exams, roommates, the best food on campus. Leonard was at Northwestern, studying journalism with a passion that sent him chasing down stories about corruption and accountability. I want to shine light where people try to hide in the dark, he told me. Like you did with Mom. Kendall was at Stanford, pre-med, his gentle heart and sharp mind drawing him toward pediatrics. Kids trust me, he'd said shyly. I want to be the kind of doctor who earns that trust. Rico had gone to MIT, throwing himself into computer science and systems design. I like making things work better, he'd said, taking something broken and figuring out how to fix it. My phone rang just as I unlocked my apartment door. Leonard's name flashed on the screen. Gran, we saw the news, he said the moment I picked up. Kendall, set up a group call. We're all here. I could hear the other 2 in the background. How are you feeling? Kendall asked. Relieved, I admitted. Closure has its own kind of weight. Good, Rico said firmly. She made her choices. Now she lives with them. There was a rustle, then Leonard again. We've been planning something, Kukshi, he said. We wanted to tell you together. My stomach fluttered. We're all coming home for Thanksgiving, Kendall said. That's the first part. And the second part, Rico added, a smile audible in his voice, is that we just had an offer accepted on a house. I sat down hard in my armchair. A what? A house, Leonard repeated. 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, big kitchen, decent yard, in Portland, paid for in full using part of the insurance money. Boys, you can't. We already did, Kendall said gently. Dad's policy was meant to secure our futures. Our future includes you. We're not leaving you in a walk-up with bad plumbing and a dying elevator. My throat burned. We set aside plenty for tuition and living expenses, Rico said. We budgeted, carefully. We had spreadsheets. You taught us better than to be reckless. I laughed through my tears. Besides, Leonard added, someday we're going to bring partners home, maybe even kids. You think we can squeeze everyone into that tiny living room of yours? We needed a proper intimidation headquarters for future in-laws. 3 months later, I stood in the kitchen of our new home, a modest, sunlit place with sturdy floors and a backyard begging for tomato plants and collard greens. The boys were home for winter break, and the house rang with the sounds I loved best: stomping feet, overlapping conversations, pots clanging, laughter spilling down the hall. Leonard sat at the dining table, laptop open, tapping away at an article about grandparents raising grandchildren. It's everywhere, he said when I brought him a cup of tea. Millions of grandparents stepping in because their kids can't or won't parent. You're not an exception, Gran. You're part of an invisible army. In the kitchen, Kendall and Rico stood shoulder to shoulder at the counter, trying to recreate Earl's famous wontons from memory. Fold from the corners, not the sides, Kendall said. You said that last time, and they still looked like deflated pillows, Rico shot back. I watched them, my heart aching in the best way. Traditions passed on, love made visible in small, clumsy gestures. My phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Please. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want to try. The boys are my sons, too. And Miss Marquita had found a way to message me from prison. I handed the phone to Leonard. He read the text, jaw tightening. What do you want to do? He asked. I looked around our warm, cluttered kitchen, the photos taped to the fridge, the scholarship letters pinned to a corkboard, the laughter spilling in from the living room. Nothing, I said, taking the phone back. I deleted the message and set the device face down on the counter. She chose money, we chose something else. And what did we choose? Rico asked from the stove. I wrapped my arms around both boys, pulling them into a hug that smelled like soy sauce and garlic. You chose love, I said. You chose family. You chose each other. That night, we gathered around the big wooden dining table the boys had found at a thrift store and refinished themselves. We ate wontons that still didn't look quite right but tasted perfect, and we shared stories about Earl and Wendell and the long, crooked road that had led us here. I realized then that I felt something I'd never truly known before: absolute peace. Marquita had given me one final lesson without meaning to. Her abandonment had forced me to grow into a mother twice over, to become the protector and anchor she'd never chosen to be. I had been tempered by every hard night, every difficult decision, every moment I stayed when it would have been easier to quit. As I looked around the table at my boys, my sons in every way that mattered, legally and emotionally, I understood something important. Her punishment wasn't the prison sentence or the ruined name or the empty bank accounts. Her punishment was this: the empty chair at our table, the laughter she would never hear, the futures she'd never be invited to witness. She'd traded her family for money she never even got to touch. I hadn't needed revenge. I only needed to keep choosing love over and over when she chose herself. Sometimes justice doesn't look like punishment. Sometimes it looks like 3 young men sitting around a table, knowing exactly who stayed. The boys were mine now, completely, irrevocably, and I was theirs. That, I realized, was justice.